Paragraph 1. The Codex Mendoza is a fascinating document describing the culture and traditions of the Aztec Indians before the Spanish conquest. What's the best follow-up to the Codex Mendoza, this cultural tradition of the Aztec Indians? U. Girls' names, on the other hand. No, on the other hand suggests a contrast and transition following something else. So that's not the first follow-on sentence. Q. A boy was often named for the date of his birth or an animal. Perhaps, no, that seems too specific or an example. I'm not sure why a boy is being named and what that has to do with the culture and traditions of Aztec Indians from the first sentence. S. Instruments used to weave and spin were given to the girls. Again, I'm not sure why. That might be a specific tradition, but not a good first follow-on to the main topic sentence. Now we're down to R and T. Let's check those. The parents would also place in the child's hands, well, also seems to follow another sentence, which does not look to be the topic sentence. So I'm hoping T is going to be the best follow-on sentence because it's the only one left. T. One tradition it describes is the feast hosted by the parents of a newborn child to give that child a name. That looks to fit very well, fortunately. One tradition is following up on the idea of describing cultures and traditions of the Aztec Indians. This paragraph will give an example of at least one of those that describes naming a newborn child. So what would follow that one tradition or sentence T? U, girls' names on the other hand? No, it wouldn't be on the other hand. A boy was named for the date of his birth? That really could fit well. S, instruments used to weave and spin were given to the girls? No, I'm not sure how that follows naming a newborn child and a feast for that. R, the parents would also place in the child's hands. No, I'm not sure what that has to do with naming a newborn child. So it looks like T is followed by Q. Specific example detailing how a boy is named, which follows the concept of the feast about naming a child at the end of sentence T. So Q, a boy was often named for the date of his birth or an animal or ancestor, or even for some event at the time of his birth. Next, U looks like a natural fit. Girls, on the other hand, which is a contrasting or transition, how girls were named, were frequently created to include the Aztec word for flower, cochito. So now we know one tradition is this naming of a newborn child, and we're given more detail how a boy is named and then how a girl is named. This just leaves S and R, and we're down to another 50-50 decision between them to choose the last two sentences. S says instruments used to weave and spin were given to the girls, while tools and weapons were given to the boys. R says the parents would also place in the hands the implements that he or she would use in adult life, gently guiding them in the motions of use. Well, the implements that he or she would use in adult life probably would be instruments for weaving for the girls and probably would be tools and weapons for the boys. So it looks like S is an example of R, which suggests it comes after R. So we'll put R above S, and let's just see that R fits nicely with U. We've figured out a way to name the boys and a way to name the girls. R says the parents would also place in the child's hands. So also actually fits nicely as a transition. It's in addition to the way the names were created, it outlines some details of this one tradition for the feast. Parents would also place in the child's hands the implements that he or she used in adult life and guide them in the motions of use. And S, again, looks like a detailed example of R of those instruments, which are alluded to at the beginning of S. Instruments is the same, refers to the implements that they'd use in life. And examples of these instruments were anything used to weave and spin for the girls and any tools and weapons for the boys. So I like the ordering of paragraph 1. Let's move on. Paragraph 2. Stephen Crane was 24 years old when his classic Civil War novel, The Red Badge of Courage, was published in 1895. So what would the follow-up to this topic sentence be? T. Maggie was self-published by Crane when he was only 21. No, I doubt that. That says very little about creating a Civil War novel. Q. Unfortunately, his first novel, Maggie, A Girl of the Streets, which chronicled life among the poor in New York City's Bowery slums, was not as successful. That looks like it would probably be a good follow-on sentence. It's automatically or immediately contrasting the topic sentence, which many paragraphs do. And the topic sentence was, he wrote this very successful Civil War novel, but unfortunately, in contrast to that, his first novel, Maggie, was somewhat of a failure. So what would likely follow that? Well, let's just check S, U, and R first to see that neither of those are a better first follow-on sentence. S, one story says that in an attempt to recoup his losses, Crane paid people to ride the Manhattan. No, that doesn't sound like follow-on to Crane in his Civil War novel. The loan became a loss. No, we don't know what loan. There's no loan mentioned in the topic sentence. R, that novel, his second, brought him almost overnight international celebrity status. That one looks like it would come ahead of you and be an even better first follow-on sentence. That novel, that pronoun referring to the Red Badge of Courage, his Civil War success novel in 1895, brought him success and celebrity status. And it indicates it was his second novel, which then transitions well into Q, the contrasting sentence. Unfortunately, his first novel, which would be the one that came before his second successful novel, Maggie, was not a success. So I think that fits pretty well. And the follow-on to Q, I think, is Maggie. T, Maggie, continuing the introduction of Maggie in sentence Q. Maggie was self-published by Crane when he was only 21, using money borrowed from his brother. And that only leaves S and U, and we're down to, again, narrowing it to a 50-50 shot for answering this question. S, one story says that in an attempt to recoup his losses, Crane paid people. No. U, the loan became a loss. Well, the loan had to become a loss before he tried to attempt to recoup it, his losses. So U seemed to clearly come ahead of S. And it naturally follows the end of T, which says he wrote and published Maggie with a loan from his brother. And that loan, the loan, it's referring to the one from his brother in sentence T prior to it at the end, became a loss. He got praise from the critics, but he probably gave away more copies than he sold. One story says that in an attempt to recoup his losses, Crane paid people to ride the Manhattan L train carrying copies of the book. And S is a detailed example of one story that shows he did give away more copies than he sold potentially, which is sentence U. So S clearly seems to follow with a one story example. So I like the order we've put together for paragraph 2. We show Stephen Crane had a classic Civil War novel, The Red Badge of Courage. That novel was his second, and it brought him success. Unfortunately, contrasting that, his first novel, Maggie, was not so much a success. Maggie was published with money from his brother, and that became a loss. Although critics liked it, it didn't really sell well. And one story says that he gave away more books than he lost, potentially on the Manhattan L train. So I like this structure in the paragraph. Let's move on to paragraph 3.